My name is Naomi Whitfield. I'm 30 years old. 8 years ago, I missed the final exam that could have changed my entire career because my parents needed the driveway clear for my brother's weekend picnic. On the morning it happened, my father stood in front of the door and said, "Dalton's picnic comes first today." My mother added, "It's just a test, Naomi. Priorities." I stood there with my exam ticket shaking in my hands, watching them load coolers into the car without me. Then my brother rolled down the window and said one thing I never forgot. What he said that morning would come back to him in ways he never saw coming. And when my parents finally learned the truth 8 years later, our entire family didn't just break, it collapsed. If you're watching this right now, please hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single one. But first, let me take you back to the beginning of being invisible in my own family. I need you to understand something about my family before I tell you what happened that morning. We weren't poor. We weren't uneducated. We looked perfectly normal from the outside. My father, Harold Whitfield, managed a regional logistics company out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Steady job, decent house, 2 kids, church on Sundays. On paper we were fine. But inside that house there was a system and I was never on the winning side of it. My brother Dalton was 2 years younger than me, but from the moment he could walk, my parents treated him like the family's one real shot at something. He wasn't especially gifted. He wasn't especially driven. But he had a certain ease about him, a charm that made adults excuse things they'd never excuse in me. If I brought home a B, my mother asked what happened. If Dalton brought home a C, my father said, "He's a people person. Grades don't measure everything." I was the one who got a part-time job at 15 at a grocery store in Broken Arrow, because my parents said I needed to learn responsibility early. Dalton didn't get a job until he was almost 20, and even then it lasted 6 weeks before he quit because his manager, in his words, didn't get his vision. By the time I was in high school, I understood the arithmetic of that house perfectly. Dalton's comfort came first. My effort came last. And somewhere around my junior year, that arithmetic started reaching into places I never expected, starting with the one thing I thought was completely mine. My future. I didn't know yet just how far my parents were willing to go to protect Dalton's comfort, even at the cost of mine. That answer was still 2 years away, and it would arrive on the one morning I could least afford it. By the time Dalton turned 16, the difference between how we were treated wasn't subtle anymore. It was built into the walls of that house. There was a shelf in our living room my mother called the trophy shelf, though Dalton had never actually won a trophy for anything academic or athletic. It held photos instead. Dalton at his 8th grade graduation. Dalton at a church youth retreat. Dalton holding a fish he'd caught on a trip with my father to a lake outside Grand Lake, Oklahoma, grinning like he'd landed a marlin. My own academic awards, and there were several, a regional essay competition in 10th grade, an honor society induction, a perfect attendance certificate 4 years running, sat in a manila folder in my desk drawer because my mother said the shelf was getting a little crowded. Dalton got a truck for his 16th birthday, used but reliable, purchased outright with cash my parents had apparently been saving for 2 years. I didn't get a car at all. I took the city bus to my job at the grocery store 40 minutes each way, through my entire junior and senior year. When I asked gently if there was any way to help me get something to drive, my father said, "Dalton needs it for his internship prospects. You're managing fine on the bus." There was no internship. Dalton didn't apply to a single one that year. In the spring of my junior year, I placed second in a statewide academic competition hosted at the University of Tulsa, beating out students from schools twice the size of ours. It was covered briefly in our local paper. Nobody in my family clipped the article. My Aunt Deborah did and mailed it to me herself with a note that said, "I'm proud of you, sweetheart, even if nobody else says it out loud." That same spring, Dalton got suspended for 2 days for cheating on a chemistry exam. My mother marched into the school with a binder of his old homework, arguing the teacher had misjudged him. The suspension got reduced to 1 day. My father took him out for barbecue that weekend to, in his words, take the sting out of a hard week. I sat at that dinner table watching my brother get comforted for cheating while I had gotten silence for excelling, and something inside me went very quiet and very cold. I didn't say anything. I never said anything. I just filed it away with everything else, the bus rides, the manila folder, the truck he barely used, and I told myself that eventually, my own effort would speak louder than their favoritism ever could. I had no idea yet how wrong that assumption would turn out to be, or how close that reckoning was about to come, on a morning that started with something as small and as ordinary as a picnic. College didn't change the arithmetic of that house. It just relocated it. I got into a strong accounting program at the University of Tulsa on a partial academic scholarship I'd fought for entirely on my own, covering about half my tuition. The rest I made up through loans, a part-time job at a tax preparation office downtown, and every summer, unpaid work at my father's logistics company back home in the same town. That arrangement started the summer after my freshman year. My father needed help with invoicing and dispatch scheduling, and rather than hire someone, he simply expected me to fill the gap. Family doesn't need to be paid like outside help, Naomi. This is how you contribute while you're living under our roof during breaks. I answered phones, reconciled shipping invoices, and trained 2 temporary hires, all without a single paycheck for 3 consecutive summers. Dalton, meanwhile, drifted through a 2-year degree at a community college nearby, switching majors twice, never once asked to contribute anything at home. When he needed money for a car repair, my parents handed it over without discussion. When I needed $40 for a textbook my financial aid hadn't fully covered, my mother sighed and said, "We're a little tight this month, sweetheart. Can you make do?" I did the math one night during my junior year, unable to sleep the way I always did when the resentment got too loud to ignore. 15 hours a week for 12 weeks. 3 summers running at Oklahoma's minimum wage at the time. That put my unpaid labor for my father's company at just over $3,200 I'd given away for free, while Dalton hadn't worked a single unpaid hour in his life. But the money was never really the point. The point was time and how casually mine kept getting spent on other people's convenience. Dalton called constantly with what my mother framed as emergencies. His car needed jumping. His roommate situation fell apart. And every time the solution was the same. "Naomi, can you run over there and help your brother sort this out? You're just better at handling things than he is." I drove across town more times than I could count during my junior year alone, missing study sessions, missing office hours with professors I badly needed to impress, all to fix problems that had nothing to do with me. I never once got a thank you that felt like it meant anything. I got, "You're a lifesaver," tossed off the way you'd thank someone for holding a door. By the spring of my senior year, I was exhausted in a way that went deeper than sleep could fix. I had one final exam left before graduation, a comprehensive certification exam required for my accounting credential, the single most important test of my academic life. I'd studied for it for 6 weeks straight, turning down every family obligation I possibly could to prepare. What I didn't know, sitting in my apartment that final week color-coding my study notes at 2 in the morning, was that my parents were already making plans for that exact Saturday, plans that had absolutely nothing to do with me and everything to do with a picnic. The exam was scheduled for Saturday, May 11th at 9 in the morning at the University of Tulsa's main testing center. It wasn't just a final for a class. It was the comprehensive certification exam required to complete my accounting credential, the one that would let me sit for professional licensure the following year. Miss it and I'd have to wait a full academic cycle, nearly 10 months, before the next available testing window opened. I had scheduled everything around that date for 6 weeks. I'd requested time off from my part-time job at the tax office. I'd turned down 2 invitations from friends. I told my parents about it explicitly twice, once at Easter dinner in April and again the Sunday before at a family lunch where I said plainly, "I need the car Saturday morning. My certification exam starts at 9, and if I miss it, I lose almost a year." My mother had nodded at the time, distracted, scrolling through something on her phone. My father hadn't said anything at all, which I now understand should have worried me more than it did. That same week, I overheard part of a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I'd come downstairs late one night for water and found my parents in the kitchen, voices low. My mother was saying something about Dalton's friends coming into town that weekend, some reunion trip they'd been planning for months, a picnic out at a lake property near Grand Lake that belonged to one of his college buddies' families. My father said, "We'll need both cars that morning. Dalton's crew is meeting at the house at 8. I stood frozen on the stairs, my exam just 2 days away, listening to my own family plan around a picnic as though my certification test simply didn't exist on their calendar at all. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself surely they wouldn't actually let a picnic collide with something this important, not after I'd told them twice, not after 6 weeks of preparation. I went to bed that Thursday night trying to convince myself I'd misunderstood what I'd heard. Friday evening, the night before the exam, I laid out my clothes, packed my calculator and admission ticket into a folder, and went to plug my phone in to charge overnight. That's when I noticed my car keys, which I always left in the same bowl by the front door, weren't there. I searched the bowl twice. I checked my room, my bag, the kitchen counter. Nothing. My stomach tightened in a way I recognized immediately, the same feeling I'd had years earlier watching Dalton get comforted for cheating while I sat there in silence. I walked into the living room where my father was watching television, and asked as calmly as I could manage, "Dad, have you seen my car keys? I need them for tomorrow morning." He didn't even look away from the screen. "We'll talk about it in the morning, Naomi. Go to bed." I stood there for a moment, my exam folder still in my hand, and something told me that whatever happened next was going to be far worse than a simple misplaced set of keys. I woke up at 6, even though the exam didn't start until 9, because I hadn't really slept. I showered, dressed, packed my folder, and walked downstairs at 6:45 to find the kitchen already full of noise. Coolers on the counter. A stack of folding chairs by the back door. My mother packing sandwiches into plastic containers, humming to herself like it was any other Saturday morning. "Mom, where are my keys?" She glanced up, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Your father has them, sweetheart. We need the car this morning for Dalton's picnic. His friends are driving in from 3 different states. It's a whole reunion thing." I felt my chest tighten. "I told you about my exam. Twice. It's at 9. If I miss it, I lose almost a year, Mom." "A full year." "It's just a test, Naomi. You can retake tests. Dalton's friends can't reschedule a whole weekend trip." My father walked in from the garage at that exact moment, keys in his hand, jingling them slightly like it was nothing at all. "Morning, kiddo. Big day for your brother. His whole crew's coming through. Dad, I need the car. My exam starts in 2 hours. I have to be there by 8:30 to check in." He looked at me the way you'd look at someone asking for something slightly unreasonable. "Naomi, we only have the one working car this weekend. Your mother's is still in the shop. You understand this is important to Dalton. He's been planning it for months." "I've been planning for this exam for 6 weeks, I said, my voice climbing despite myself. "This isn't optional. This determines when I can get licensed." That's when Dalton walked in through the side door, carrying a cooler, grinning, dressed for a lake day in shorts and flip-flops like the entire morning was already decided in his favor. He set the cooler down at my feet, the exact way I'd remember for the next 8 years, and said, "Relax, Nay, it's just a test. Grab the folding chairs, would you? They're by the door." "I'm not going to your picnic, Dalton. I have an exam." He laughed, actually laughed, glancing at my parents like I was the unreasonable one in the room. "It's not that serious. You can always take it again." I looked at my mother, standing in the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed. I looked at my father, keys still jingling in his hand. I looked at the clock on the wall. 7:15. I had exactly 75 minutes to get to the testing center, and every single adult in that house was treating my future like a scheduling inconvenience. "Please," I said, and I hated how small my voice sounded. "Please just let me have the car for 2 hours. I'll bring it right back." My mother's expression didn't soften at all. What she said next wasn't loud and it wasn't angry. It was worse than that. It was completely, chillingly calm, the kind of sentence that tells you exactly where you stand in a family, and it's a sentence I have never once been able to forget even 8 years later. "Naomi," my mother said, folding her arms tighter, "you get one test like this and suddenly the whole household has to stop for you. Dalton only gets this reunion once. You'll figure something out. You always do." That sentence landed harder than anything she'd said to me in years, because it wasn't cruelty, it was indifference, delivered so casually she was already turning back to the sandwiches before she finished the last word. My father walked past me toward the door with the keys still in his hand, calling over his shoulder, "We'll be back by early afternoon. There's cereal if you're hungry." I stood in that kitchen at 7:20, 69 minutes from a testing center I now had no way to reach, watching my family load coolers and folding chairs into the one working car like nothing unusual was happening at all. I called a rideshare app with shaking hands, praying the fare wouldn't wipe out the $11 in my checking account. The nearest driver was 38 minutes away in a low-coverage part of town. Even if the car arrived instantly, I'd have no way to make check-in by 8:30. I called the testing center directly at 7:30, my voice cracking as I explained I might be late due to a transportation emergency. The woman on the line was sympathetic but firm. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, our policy is strict. Anyone arriving after the 30-minute check-in window forfeits the exam slot for this cycle. There are no exceptions even for emergencies." I sat down on the porch steps outside, my exam folder still clutched in my lap, and watched the driveway sit empty where our car should have been. By 8:45 I knew for certain the window had closed completely. I hadn't even made it out the front door. At 11 my phone rang. An unfamiliar number with a local area code. I almost let it go to voicemail assuming it was spam, but something made me answer. It was the registrar's office at the University of Tulsa. A woman named Ms. Faraday, calling to confirm my absence had been logged as a no-show rather than an excused emergency, since no documentation had been submitted in time. "I understand this is difficult," she said, her voice careful, "but I do want to let you know something before you go in case it changes your decision about how to handle this." She paused for just a moment before continuing, and whatever she said next was about to determine whether that single missed exam would define the next year of my life, or whether there was still a door left open that I hadn't even considered. Miss Faraday explained that while the missed exam slot for that cycle couldn't be recovered, there was one narrow exception. Students who could demonstrate a documented hardship within 72 hours could apply for a special administrative review, a rarely granted appeal that occasionally allowed an early retest instead of waiting the full 10 months. It wasn't a guarantee. It required a written statement, supporting evidence, and approval from a faculty committee. But it was something. A door left slightly open. "I'd need everything submitted by Tuesday," she said. "It's a long shot, Naomi, but it exists." I thanked her, hung up, and sat on that porch step for a long time, my mind moving faster than it had all morning. I thought about the transportation records I could pull from the rideshare app showing the timestamp of my request. I thought about the phone call I'd made to the testing center at 7:30, which they'd likely have logged. I thought about writing down in detail exactly what had happened that morning, the missing keys, the picnic, my father's voice telling me to figure something out. I went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and started writing. Not for my parents. For the appeals committee. I documented everything factually without embellishment, because I understood even then that the truth alone would be damning enough. I attached the rideshare timestamp. I attached the call log from the testing center. I submitted it Monday morning, 2 days later, with steady hands and a strange, cold clarity I hadn't expected to feel. My parents got home from the picnic that Saturday around 4 in the afternoon. Sunburned and cheerful, Dalton recounting some story about a friend falling off a dock. Nobody asked me how the exam went. Nobody asked at all. I finally said it myself standing in the kitchen doorway. I missed it. I never made it to the testing center. My mother's face flickered with something that might have been guilt, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. I'm sure you can retake it, sweetheart. It's not the end of the world. Dalton, cooler still in his hand, said, "See, told you it wasn't that big a deal," and walked past me toward the kitchen like the conversation was already over. That was the moment something in me finally, permanently closed. Not with anger, not with a scene, just a quiet, absolute understanding that nothing I built in that house would ever be treated as real until it directly benefited someone else. I didn't announce anything. I didn't argue. I went upstairs that same night, pulled my old duffel bag from the closet and started packing. Clothes for a week. My laptop. The folder with my appeal documentation. $140 in cash I'd saved from tax season tips. I didn't know yet whether that appeal would actually work, whether the committee would grant the review or dismiss it outright. I didn't know where I'd stay beyond a friend's couch for a few nights. All I knew, standing in that room zipping up a bag while my family laughed downstairs about a lake trip, was that I was leaving that house, and I had absolutely no idea it would be 8 full years before I set foot in it again. I left the following morning before anyone else woke up, took the bus to my friend Renata's apartment near campus, and slept on her couch for 11 days while I waited to hear back on the appeal. Renata never asked too many questions. She just handed me a blanket the first night and said, "Stay as long as you need." The appeal committee responded on a Thursday afternoon, an email I must have read 15 times before it fully registered. Given documented transportation hardship and timely notification to the testing center, the committee has approved an early administrative retest, scheduled for June 3rd. It wasn't a guarantee of anything beyond a second chance, but after that Saturday morning, a second chance felt like the entire world. I studied for that retest harder than I'd studied for anything in my life, sitting at Renata's kitchen table night after night, and on June 3rd, I passed with the highest score in my testing group. I finished my degree that August, walked at graduation with almost no family present, my Aunt Deborah the only one who showed up, sitting alone in the audience holding a small bouquet of grocery store flowers. I moved to Dallas, Texas 3 weeks later, mostly because it was far enough from Tulsa to feel like an actual boundary, and because an entry-level staff accountant position at a mid-sized firm called Pemberton Cole had offered me $41,000 a year, benefits included. I packed everything I owned into a rented sedan and drove 6 hours south with $190 in my checking account and absolutely no plan beyond surviving the first month's rent. The first year in Dallas was brutal in ways I hadn't fully prepared for. I worked long hours, ate cheap food, and called my parents maybe twice in 12 months, both times briefly, both times circling back somehow to updates about Dalton, who had drifted into a retail management job that lasted 7 months before he was let go for what my mother vaguely described as a personality conflict with ownership. I threw myself into studying for my CPA license in the evenings, using tuition reimbursement money the firm offered that almost nobody else on staff bothered to use. I sat for the exam sections over 18 months, passing each one on the first attempt, and by the time I finished in the spring of my second year in Dallas, I had something no one in my family had ever handed me. A credential entirely my own, earned without a single hour of help. I applied for a promotion to senior accountant that same year and got it 40 minutes into an interview I'd prepared for obsessively. My supervisor, a sharp, plain-spoken woman named Corinne Baptiste, pulled me aside afterward and said, "You work like someone who's trying to prove something. What's the story there?" I told her only part of it, that I'd had a setback once and didn't plan on having another. What I didn't tell her, because I didn't fully understand it myself yet, was that the setback I'd survived was about to become the exact foundation for something far bigger than either of us could have predicted that afternoon, something that would eventually put my own name on a door, and put my brother, of all people, on the other side of it. The promotion to senior accountant changed the trajectory of everything, though it took 2 more years before I fully understood how much. I specialized in forensic accounting almost by accident, after being assigned to a fraud investigation case nobody else at Pemberton Cole wanted to touch. It was detailed, painstaking work tracing discrepancies through years of falsified vendor invoices, and I was good at it in a way that quietly surprised the partners who'd underestimated me. By 2020, 3 years after I'd arrived in Dallas with $190 and no plan, I was leading forensic engagements independently, billing out at rates that would have made my father's entire annual salary look small by comparison. In early 2021, Corinne pulled me into her office and told me something that changed everything again. She was retiring within 18 months, and she wanted to know if I'd ever consider starting something of my own because, in her words, "You've outgrown being someone else's employee, Naomi. You built half this division without anyone handing you the tools." I spent the next year building a business plan in every spare hour I had, meeting with potential clients quietly, securing a small business loan, and in September of 2022, I opened Whitfield Forensic Accounting, a boutique firm specializing in fraud investigation and financial compliance, with exactly 2 employees, myself and 1 junior associate I'd poached from my old firm. I want to be honest about how frightening that first year was. I mortgaged nearly everything I'd saved into that firm. I worked 80-hour weeks. I slept maybe 5 hours some nights, reviewing contracts and chasing down clients who weren't sure they trusted a firm with no track record yet. But slowly, one case at a time, one satisfied client referral at a time, Whitfield Forensic Accounting started to grow. By 2023, we'd expanded to 6 employees and moved into a proper office space in downtown Dallas, with my name etched into the glass door in simple black lettering. I remember standing in front of that door the day the sign went up, thinking about the girl who'd sat on a porch step in Tulsa 8 years earlier, watching a car pull out of the driveway without her. I kept my personal life quiet during those years. I visited Tulsa exactly twice, both for brief obligatory holidays, keeping the conversations shallow and short. Dalton, meanwhile, had drifted through 4 more jobs since the picnic: a warehouse position, a car sales gig, a brief and unsuccessful attempt at real estate licensing that he never actually completed. My mother described each attempt to relatives as though he were on the verge of something enormous, and each time within months, the story quietly disappeared. By the start of 2025, my firm had grown to 14 employees, a client roster that included 2 publicly traded companies, and a reputation in Dallas's financial community that I had built entirely without a single dollar or hour of help from the family that once told me a picnic mattered more than my future. I had no idea, sitting in my office reviewing that year's hiring plan for a new compliance analyst position, that the next application to land on my desk would carry a name I hadn't seen in almost 8 years. And that opening that file would be the moment everything I thought I'd left behind in Tulsa came walking straight back through my front door. It was a Wednesday morning in April of 2025, and I was at my desk reviewing applications for a compliance analyst opening we'd posted 2 weeks earlier. We'd received just over 80 applications by then, and I was scrolling through them the way I did every morning, coffee going cold beside me, when a name near the bottom of the list stopped me completely. Dalton Whitfield. I sat there for a moment, absolutely certain it had to be a coincidence, another Dalton Whitfield somewhere in Texas. But when I clicked into the file, the resume loaded, and the photo attached to it was unmistakable, older, heavier, but unmistakably my brother. I scrolled down to his work history and my stomach tightened before I'd even finished reading the first line. Compliance and Financial Operations Associate, Meridian Business Solutions, Tulsa, Oklahoma, listed for a period of nearly 3 years, spanning almost exactly the years I now knew he'd actually spent drifting between the warehouse job, the car sales position, and the failed real estate attempt. Underneath it, a list of duties that read like something copied directly from a job description template. Managed vendor compliance documentation. Coordinated internal audit procedures. Reduced processing discrepancies through improved tracking systems. I searched Meridian Business Solutions in the Texas and Oklahoma business registries. Nothing. No such company existed or had ever existed in either state. My hands went still on the keyboard. I scrolled down to his references, half already knowing what I was going to find before I got there. First reference listed, Harold Whitfield, description simply, former supervisor. My own father listed as a professional reference for a compliance job at a company that had never existed, for work that, as far as I could tell, sounded suspiciously close to the exact kind of invoicing and documentation work I had done, unpaid, for 3 summers running at my father's real logistics company, years before Dalton had ever touched a spreadsheet in his life. I sat back in my chair, the applicant file still glowing on my screen, and felt something cold and clear settle over me. The same clarity I'd felt 8 years earlier sitting on that porch step watching the driveway sit empty. Our firm's hiring protocol required full employment verification on every finalist before any offer went out. No exceptions, a policy I had personally written into our onboarding procedures the year we opened. I had 2 options sitting in front of me. Recuse myself entirely, flag the conflict of interest, and hand the file to someone else on my team. Or follow protocol exactly the way I would for any other candidate and let the verification process reveal whatever it was going to reveal. I thought about the missing car keys. I thought about the cooler dropped at my feet. I thought about my mother's voice telling me I'd figure something out, and my father telling me it wasn't that big a deal. I picked up the office phone and dialed the first number listed for Meridian Business Solutions, and as it began to ring, I had absolutely no idea that the voice about to answer on the other end was going to confirm something far worse than I had even suspected. The number rang twice and then disconnected entirely, the flat, dead tone confirming what the business registry search had already told me. Meridian Business Solutions didn't exist. I searched further, cross-referencing the exact address listed on Dalton's resume, and found it belonged to a UPS mailbox rental store in Tulsa, the kind of address anyone could rent for $20 a month to make a fictional company look real on paper. I called my father's actual company next, the real logistics business in Tulsa where I had answered phones for free 3 summers running. His longtime office manager, a woman named Glenda who'd worked there since before I was born, picked up on the second ring. I gave her my professional title and explained I was conducting a standard employment verification for a candidate named Dalton Whitfield. There was a long pause. "Naomi? Is that really you, honey?" Her voice softened and then shifted the moment she processed what I was actually asking. "Dalton never worked here in any official capacity, sweetheart. You know that better than anyone. You were the one doing that invoicing work every summer, not him." I asked her directly whether she was aware of any arrangement where my father might have agreed to serve as a reference for a job Dalton had never actually held. She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I don't know anything about that specifically. But Naomi, I remember exactly whose hands were on that filing system, and it wasn't your brother's." I thanked her, hung up, and then dialed my father directly at his office line, not identifying myself right away, simply stating I was conducting a routine verification call for an applicant. "I'm calling to verify employment for Dalton Whitfield," I said, "listed as a compliance associate at Meridian Business Solutions in Tulsa, for approximately 3 years. Can you confirm those details as his former supervisor?" There was a pause on the line longer than I expected. "Yes, that's correct. He did excellent work. Very detail-oriented, very reliable." "And during that same period, did anyone else in your family perform similar compliance or invoicing duties at your company?" Another pause, this one longer still. "No. Just Dalton." That was the lie that confirmed everything. As I had existed. I had been there, unpaid, for 3 full summers, doing exactly the kind of work now attributed to a brother who had spent that same window bouncing between a warehouse floor and a used car lot. I still had old text messages from my mother asking me to cover shifts. I had pay stubs that didn't exist because I'd never been paid at all. I had 8 years of silence that had just been broken by one confirmed, deliberate lie. I thanked my father, still without revealing who I was, and ended the call. I sat there for a long moment afterward, my hands steady in a way that almost surprised me. I wasn't shaking the way I had on that porch step 8 years earlier. I felt something closer to certainty. I wrote one line in Dalton's applicant file. Employment verification failed. Listed employer does not exist. Recommend in-person interview to address directly. Then I picked up my phone and scheduled that interview myself for the following Monday, with absolutely no idea that the moment my brother walked through our office door, he would have no idea at all whose name was on the glass above it. I scheduled Dalton's interview through our standard applicant portal, the same way I would for anyone else. Dear Dalton, thank you for your application to the compliance analyst position at Whitfield Forensic Accounting. We would like to invite you for an in-person interview on Monday at 10 in the morning at our Dallas office. You will meet with Naomi Whitfield, founder and managing director, and Corinne Baptiste, senior advisor. He replied within the hour. Sounds great, I'll be there. No recognition at all, not of the company name, not of mine, nothing. 8 years of near silence between us, and he genuinely hadn't connected the dots. I told Corinne everything the day before, the fake company, the fabricated references, my father confirming the lie over the phone. She listened without interrupting, then said only, "You lead it. I'll sit in as a witness." Monday morning I sat in our conference room watching the lobby through the glass wall. At 9:58 Dalton walked in wearing an ill-fitting blazer, portfolio tucked under his arm, looking heavier and more tired than the version of him I remembered from that kitchen 8 years ago. He checked in at the front desk and I walked out to meet him myself. He looked up, saw my face and froze completely. "Naomi? What are you doing here?" "I own this firm," I said. "Please follow me." He followed, visibly rattled, into the conference room where Corinne was already seated. I took the center chair and gestured for him to sit across from us. "Let's get started," I said, my voice calm. "Walk us through your resume." The first few minutes were standard questions about software, about attention to detail. Dalton answered nervously but adequately. Then I leaned forward. "I see you worked at Meridian Business Solutions in Tulsa for nearly 3 years. Tell me about that role." "Yeah, compliance work, invoicing, audits, that kind of thing. Small company but solid experience." "I called to verify that employment last week," I said. "There's no business registered under that name anywhere in Texas or Oklahoma. The address on your resume is a mailbox rental store. I also called Dad's actual company. Glenda still works there. She confirmed you never held a formal position doing that work." Dalton's face drained of color. "I helped out sometimes. Around the office. It counts for something." "You did none of that work," I said. "I did every hour of it for 3 summers unpaid while you were still in high school. Every duty on this resume is my labor with your name attached to it." He started to argue, voice rising, when Corinne's phone lit up on the table between us. A message confirming what our applicants sign consent to on every final round interview for compliance-sensitive roles. The entire conversation, every word of it, was already being recorded for our internal audit file, and Dalton had signed that consent form himself, 3 days earlier, without reading a single line of it. Corinne ended the interview formally a few minutes later, informing Dalton that we could not move forward given the confirmed misrepresentation, and that the fabricated employment history would be noted in our internal hiring records. He left the building without saying another word to me, and I didn't walk him out. The call started that evening. My mother first, her voice sharp through the phone. "How could you humiliate your brother like that? In front of a potential employer? Do you have any idea what you've done to him?" I let it go to voicemail. My father called an hour later, his message shorter and colder. "This is a family matter, Naomi. You didn't need to make it a workplace incident. Call me back." I didn't call either of them that night. The next morning my mother sent a long text ending with, "Your brother is devastated. Fix this." I read it once and set the phone face down on my desk. 2 days later I finally called my father, mostly because there was one thing I needed to say directly. I asked him plainly why he'd lied on that verification call, confirming a job that never existed. He was quiet for a long moment. I didn't think anyone would actually check, Naomi. Your brother asked me to help him. I didn't think it would matter. It mattered 8 years ago too, I said. The morning you took my car. He didn't have an answer. The silence stretched almost 30 seconds before he simply said, I have to go, and hung up. I haven't heard from Dalton directly since that Monday morning. My mother calls occasionally, conversations that stay carefully on the surface, never once circling back to what actually happened in either direction 8 years apart. It's been almost a year now since that Monday morning in the conference room. Whitfield Forensic Accounting has grown to 19 employees. We brought on a new compliance analyst that spring, someone with an honest resume and real references, and the role has nothing to do with what happened before it. I heard through my Aunt Deborah that Dalton is working construction now, outside Tulsa. I don't know much beyond that, and I've stopped asking. My father sent a text on my birthday this year for words, thinking of you, kiddo. I didn't answer right away. I'm still not sure if I answered out of forgiveness or just habit. I think about that morning in the kitchen sometimes, the cooler at my feet, the folder of exam materials I never got to use. For years I believed missing that exam meant I wasn't capable of the life I wanted. It took me a long time to understand it was never about capability at all. It was about a family that had already decided long before that Saturday whose morning mattered and whose didn't. I don't know if my parents will ever fully understand what they did, that morning or in the years of silence that followed it. But I've stopped waiting for that understanding to arrive before I let myself move forward. I built a firm without their permission once already. I know exactly how to keep building without it. If you've ever been the one expected to wait, to give, to disappear quietly while someone else got the comfort, I hope this reached you today. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and if this story meant something to you, hit subscribe. There are more stories like this coming. Thank you for listening.